I get some interesting questions at times, and one I've just been recently faced with is it wrong to eat meat? Now, when I was meat in this context, talking about flesh food, whether it be some rump steak or lamb chops or chicken or whatever. In general, in the Bible, meat can either mean that, or meat is also a biblical word for food, which means the lettuce and tomatoes. Biblically, that can be classed as meat as well, but I'm talking about the animal product meat. First, a little bit of a rundown, a bit of history. In Genesis, creation week, we've got the original diet here. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 29. And this is after God had created man, and it says, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." See, that word meat there is talking about food in general. And I read the next verse as well. Verse 30, "And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. And so, right at the beginning, even the animals were vegetarian, but he made Eve to be vegetarian, and the animals. Now, after the flood, things changed. That's when God did permit to eat meat, and we find that in Genesis chapter 9 and verses 3 and 4. And he says, this is God talking here. This is after Noah's, they've come out of the ark after the flood. "Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as a green herb have I given you all things." But listen to this one, verse 4. "But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, ye shall not eat." So, one of the requirements for eating meat is that you drain the blood. And then we got in Leviticus. Leviticus is known as the book of the law, of the all the different laws they had for all sorts of reasons. For cleanliness, for doing sacrifices, for all sorts of things. There's hundreds of them. I think there's about 600 all up, or close to that amount, I'm not sure. But we're definitely not going to go into all of that. We're going to look at Leviticus chapter 3, and we want verse 17, I think. No, verse, I can't find it now. Oh, let me press the pause for a minute. Yeah, I was looking at it. I've got to put this up here because I've got to block up the company logo what I work for. It's not allowed on social media. Okay, Leviticus chapter 3 and verse 17. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings. Perpetual means never ending. So this is a never ending statute or law. Okay, I'll start it again. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings, that ye neither eat fat nor blood. So we just read in Genesis chapter 9 not to have the fat, the blood. But here in Leviticus it also mentions you don't eat the fat as well. So when you eat your meat, the blood and the fat needs to be removed. So if you do those two things, it is not wrong to eat meat. But there's one more condition. One more. And we're going to go to Leviticus chapter 11. More laws about eating meat, animal foods. And basically, I'm not going to go through it because there's a lot. There's some 40, at least 40 verses in there. I can't quite get the page over. Pages stick together a little bit. There we go. There's 47 verses in Leviticus 11 to doing with eating meat. Now, but what I will mention in here, the subheading, it says clean and unclean meats. Now there are some meats, some animals that God calls unclean. Alright, and just for an example, pork is unclean, pigs are an unclean animal, cats and dogs are an unclean animal, so is a horse. And you read through Leviticus 11 and it will give you the guidelines for what to look for in animals, what you can eat and what you can't eat. So I'm not going to go through it. You can even do a Google search of clean and unclean meats as classified in the Bible. It will give you there's quite a few sites that will give you a comprehensive list as to what is biblically acceptable to eat and biblically not acceptable to eat. But it's strange, people will say that God's changed his mind here, because in the New Testament Peter had a dream of all these unclean animals brought down to him on a big rug or carpet or something. I'm not really too sure. We'll look into it anyway. And God said to Peter, kill and eat. And Peter says, no, I'm not going to have that because it's unclean. And God said to him, what God has made clean, don't you call unclean? Now, is that saying that it doesn't matter if we eat what's in Leviticus chapter 11, what is classed as unclean? Let's have a look at it. Let's go to Acts chapter 10. It's a very misunderstood passage. I'm going to try and keep it short, but there is a bit of detail in it. And I'm going to go straight into the dream. There is a few verses in front of it what I wanted to look at, but I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go straight to the dream itself. So Acts chapter 10 and verse 10. And he, Peter, became very hungry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners, and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And there came a voice to him, saying, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. This is verse 13 of, so far I've read from 10 to 13. I'm going to read verse 14. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the second time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. So basically, Peter's refusing these animals to kill and eat because in his knowledge they were unclean, and he's never had unclean meat to eat before. He's always kept to the biblical standards. Let's continue. Verse 16. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into heaven. And 17. Now while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from... I'm going to stop there because it's quite a study, quite a story in it. You can read it yourself, but in that last verse here, what I just started reading, in 17, Peter himself wasn't quite sure what the dream meant. It says he doubted in himself. And I'm going to read verses 19 and 20. No, I will leave them alone. I just summarize it. God sent some men to talk to Peter, possibly about Christianity. It might have been a Bible study. I'd have to read through it all to get a better picture of it again. I've got a bad memory sometimes for these things. But I'm going to go down to verse 28. And this is Peter talking to this one man in particular. His name is Cornelius. Again, if you read Acts chapter 10, the full chapter, to give you the full story of it. But here in verse 28, it says, And he, Peter, said unto them, these men, Do ye know how it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or to come unto one of another nation? I'm going to stop there. That's halfway through the verse. It was wrong then, not so much in the eyes of God, but it was wrong. The Jews considered it wrong to talk to anyone or mingle with anyone who wasn't a Jew. And so they would keep to themselves. If you weren't a Jew, they'd have nothing to do with you. These men who came to talk to Peter were not Jews. Let's continue. Actually, I'll start that verse again. And he, Peter, said unto them, Ye know how it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation, anyone not a Jew. But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. And that is talking about the vision what Peter had in verse 10 through to 13. That is what the dream was all about. Wasn't God saying that you can now eat any meat what you want? he was simply comparing clean and unclean to Jews and common people, because usually the two would not mix. Jews keep to the Jews and common people, and anyone who's not a Jew would keep to anyone else who wasn't a Jew. But now God is making it clear to Peter that the gospel goes to all the world. The gospel is for everybody, not just for the Jews. And one other verse I might chuck in. I wasn't going to, but if we're going to say that these laws for food, clean and unclean food, is only for the Jews, well, have a look at this verse. This is Romans chapter 2 and verse I'm going to read 28 and 29. For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. And the circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men but of God. So, if Jesus is our Saviour, whether you're German or Australian or Italian or Greek or Turkish or Irish or English or Scandinavian or whatever, if you have accepted Jesus as your Saviour, you are a spiritual Jew. As in, the Jews in the beginning was God's chosen people. And so we are spiritual Jews if we have accepted Jesus as our Saviour. So is it wrong to eat meat? Well, read the Leviticus 11 and it'll tell you what animals you can kill and eat and which ones you can't. And as long if you keep by those principles, and where it says in Leviticus not to eat the fat or the blood, you are not doing anything wrong. I personally, I'm happy to be a vegetarian. I love the vegetarian diet, and I've got no interest in eating any meat, but that's just my opinion. And so I hope that will answer your question if you have questioned that yourself. Is it wrong to eat meat? As long as it's within the biblical guidelines? No, it is not. And if Jesus is your Saviour, that shouldn't be a problem for you, either way. So I hope that's an answer to your question. If that has been a question, what you've often wondered about, this is a much bigger study. I've tried to condense it, but it can there's a lot more verses to look at. It can take a good couple hours for a proper study, and that's still not even scratching all of the surface. That's still not going into it deeply. So I'm going to finish it there, and hope that you have accepted Jesus as your Saviour, and that you will love Him and serve Him and honour Him. And in doing that, it's the best decision you could ever make in your life, and it's the best decision I've made in my life. And I know I'm a very happy person because Jesus is my Saviour, and I wish for the same for you as well.